Let me ask you something before we get into this. If I told you there was a watch, one single watch that has been worn by Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Fidel Castro, would you believe me? What if I told you that same watch showed up on the wrist of an Al-Qaeda operative in a Guantanamo Bay interrogation file? That the United States military has flagged it as a terrorism indicator? That it costs less than a large pizza at Domino's? Because here's what's wild: that watch exists. It's sitting in gas stations right now. It's on the wrist of a 12-year-old kid doing homework in Indonesia. It's on the wrist of a Navy SEAL on a mission. It's in the pocket of a billionaire tech founder who could buy 1,000 Rolexes before breakfast and chose not to. The Casio F91W, $20. 40 years on the market, 3 million units sold every single year without a single major redesign. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand why this tiny, plastic, unremarkable looking watch might be the most fascinating object in the history of consumer products. We're gonna cover the full story: the engineering, the cultural mythology, the terrorism files, the presidents, and the one design decision made in 1989 that nobody at Casio probably even thought twice about that ended up making history. Stay with me. By the 1980s, the watch industry was in complete chaos, and I mean that in the best possible way. The Swiss, who had dominated watchmaking for centuries, had just been blindsided by something they never saw coming: the quartz revolution. Japanese companies like Seiko, Citizen, and Casio had figured out how to put a battery-powered quartz crystal into a watch movement, and that technology was so accurate, so cheap to produce, and so easy to manufacture at scale that it essentially wiped out an entire category of Swiss craftsmanship overnight. Hundreds of Swiss watch companies went bankrupt in the 1970s alone. It became known as the quartz crisis. Think about it this way. Imagine you've spent 300 years perfecting the art of hand-carving wooden furniture, intricate joinery, generational craft, premium pricing. Then IKEA shows up with flat-pack boxes and an Allen wrench, and suddenly your furniture is just as functional, a tenth of the price, and available at a store in every city on the planet. That's roughly what happened to the Swiss watch industry when Japan showed up with quartz. For Casio specifically, this wasn't just a business opportunity, it was a mission statement. The company had been founded in 1957 by Tado Cascio with one goal: apply technology to make useful things affordable for ordinary people. They weren't chasing luxury. They were chasing utility, the idea that a great tool shouldn't require a great salary to own. By the mid-80s, Casio had already released several successful digital watch models, but they hadn't yet made the one. The watch that would become so embedded in global culture that it would transcend every demographic, every income bracket, every ideology on Earth. That watch was coming. And it arrived in 1989. Enter the F91W. No celebrity endorsement. No Fashion Week debut. No marketing campaign. Casio released it into the market the way you'd put a new vending machine in a break room quietly, practically, with the understanding that if it works, people will use it. The design team's philosophy wasn't complicated. They wanted a watch that told you the time accurately, lasted a long time on a single battery, survived daily wear without falling apart, and cost almost nothing to produce and sell. That's it. That was the entire brief. What they built was a watch with a 100-meter water resistance rating, an LED backlight, a daily alarm, a stopwatch function, a battery life of 7 years, and a total weight of 21 grams. For context, 21 grams is roughly the weight of 4 nickels. You can hold it in your palm and barely feel it. One engineer who worked on Casio's product line during that era described the design process as trying to answer one question: what is the minimum amount of watch someone needs to never wish they had more watch? That framing is everything. Because the F91W didn't fail to be luxurious, it refused to be. The F91W had 3 clear engineering advantages that separated it from competitors in its price range. First, the quartz movement. The watch uses a standard 32 kHz quartz oscillator, the same technology that made Swiss manufacturers panic. But Casio had refined their manufacturing so efficiently that they could produce this movement at a cost that made the entire watch viable at $20 retail while still generating profit. The accuracy is plus or minus 30 seconds per month. For context, an entry-level mechanical watch at 10 times the price can drift by several minutes. Second, the resin case. Casio didn't use metal or glass on the F91W, they used high-grade resin throughout. This was a deliberate cost and weight decision that had an unintended side effect. The watch became nearly indestructible for normal use. Drop it on concrete, throw it in a bag, leave it in the rain, the resin absorbed punishment that would crack or scratch a metal case. The strap, also resin, was replaceable for under $3 if it broke. Third, the mineral glass crystal. Casio used a hardened mineral glass face rather than the plastic acrylic used on even cheaper watches. This meant the watch face resisted scratching in a way that made it look presentable years after purchase. You could wear this watch every day for 5 years and the face would still look clean. Still, the project wasn't without its constraints. Because the watch had to hit that sub-$20 price point, every component had to be engineered to the absolute minimum viable standard. The backlight, for example, uses a single electroluminescent panel that gives you roughly a second of light per button press, enough to read the time in the dark, but barely. There was no room for excess. Over the next several years, Casio refined the manufacturing process across multiple production runs, testing durability through drop tests, temperature cycling, and humidity exposure. The goal wasn't innovation for its own sake, it was consistency. Every F91W that came off the line had to perform identically to the last one, whether it was assembled in China, Thailand, or Japan. What they ended up with was something that functioned like a precision instrument and cost like a convenience store snack. When the F91W launched globally in the early 90s, the reaction from the watch industry was essentially a shrug. High-end watchmakers didn't see it as competition. Fashion watch brands didn't see it as style. Nobody took it seriously as a cultural artifact. The problem, if you want to call it that, was that the watch had no identity. It wasn't aspirational. It wasn't military spec. It wasn't retro. It wasn't anything, really, except accurate and cheap and reliable. In a market where branding drives purchasing decisions, the F91W had no brand. It had a model number. But like so many products that find their audience the hard way, the F91W discovered its people, and its people turned out to be everyone. In developing economies across Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, the watch became a genuine status symbol for working people who had never been able to afford a reliable timepiece. In those markets, owning a watch at all meant something. Owning one that was accurate, durable, and came with a recognizable name on the face, even if that name was just Casio, meant you had your life together. The F91W became associated with competence, with reliability, with getting to work on time and not apologizing for it. In the West, the watch quietly accumulated a cult following among people who rejected the idea that a timepiece needed to cost what a used car costs to be worth wearing. Engineers wore it. Programmers wore it. Outdoors, people wore it. People who spent their days around expensive equipment and couldn't afford to worry about scratching a luxury watch wore it constantly. And then came the story nobody at Casio could have planned for. In the early 2000s, following the September 11th attacks, United States military and intelligence analysts began reviewing the equipment used by Al-Qaeda operatives in improvised explosive device construction. What they found kept showing up in training manuals, in surveillance footage, and in the personal effects of detainees at Guantanamo Bay, the Casio F91W. The reason was purely functional. Terrorist bomb makers had discovered that the watch's circuit board could be modified to function as a timer detonator. The technology wasn't sophisticated, the watch wasn't designed for this. And it took someone with electronics knowledge to make it work. But the F91W was cheap, widely available without raising suspicion, and small enough to embed in a device without detection. By 2003, the United States Department of Defense had circulated internal documents identifying the F91W as a potential terrorism indicator. Detainees wearing it at Guantanamo were flagged specifically because of the watch. This was reported publicly in 2008 through documents obtained via Freedom of Information requests. Here's the absurdity. Casio had sold this watch to elementary school kids, to grandmothers, to soldiers, to fishermen, to heads of state, and now it was being used as an indicator of radicalization. The same watch, the same $20 watch. The irony wasn't lost on the internet when this story resurfaced years later and went viral. Barack Obama was photographed wearing one. George W. Bush wore one. Field commanders in Afghanistan wore them because they were reliable and disposable. Meanwhile, that identical watch was being flagged in intelligence files. Nothing has ever illustrated the completely democratic, across every category reach of this product quite like that contradiction. The success of the Casio F91W really came down to one core philosophy: trust the function, and the culture will follow. Casio never chased trends with this watch. Over the decades, while other brands were redesigning, rebranding, collaborating with celebrities, and chasing hype cycles, the F91W sat completely still. They updated the manufacturing. They improved battery consistency. They expanded the color options slightly. But the fundamental watch, the design, the dimensions, the display, the weight, remained almost identical from 1989 forward. By 2010, the vintage watch community had started treating original F91W units from the early 90s as collectibles. By 2015, streetwear culture had adopted it as the anti-flex. Flex the watch you wear specifically because it costs $20 and you're not interested in performing wealth. Brands like Supreme began referencing it. Tech executives started wearing it as a statement. Hypebeast culture, which usually demands expense, made an exception for the F91W because the irony was too perfect. Today, Casio sells approximately 3 million units per year. Across 4 decades of production, the total number of F91W units sold is estimated to exceed 100 million. 100 million units of one single, unchanged, $20 watch. The Swiss watch industry, which once sold precision craftsmanship as its core identity, has never produced a single model that comes close to that volume. For me, what makes the F91W fascinating has never really been the watch itself. It's what the watch reveals about how we actually assign value to things. We tell ourselves that price reflects quality, that what you pay is what something is worth. That luxury is a signal of something, real taste, discernment, success. And then a $20 Casio shows up and performs identically to watches that cost 50 times as much, outlasts them, survives more punishment, and ends up on the wrist of every demographic on Earth simultaneously. This embodies a philosophy that I think is genuinely rare in consumer culture. The idea that the most honest version of a product is the most functional one. It's not about stripping away features, it's about being so precise about what something needs to do that everything unnecessary falls away on its own. Like the Swiss Army knife, like the Jeep Wrangler, like the Converse Chuck Taylor, the F91W became iconic, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. These objects have a clarity of purpose that more expensive, more complicated products almost never achieve. The watch is beautiful, not in the way that a Patek Philippe is beautiful, where you're appreciating the craftsmanship and the history and the movement visible through the case back. It's beautiful, the way a good hammer is beautiful. The way a well-designed tool that does exactly what it's supposed to do every single time, without asking for anything in return, is beautiful. I love this story because it's really not a watch story at all. It's a story about what happens when you stop trying to impress people and start trying to actually serve them. Casio built something for working people, sold it for practically nothing, and accidentally created one of the most democratic, culturally cross-cutting products in the history of manufacturing. Presidents and bomb makers, billionaires and street vendors, soldiers and students, the same watch. What the watch industry, and honestly a lot of industries, could learn from this is that the market has a long memory for things that actually work. You don't have to manufacture desire when your product genuinely earns it. The F91W never asked to be iconic. It just kept telling time. Without a doubt, a lot of you have stories about this watch. Maybe you wore one growing up, maybe you still do. Or maybe you know someone whose entire identity is this $20 Casio on their wrist. Drop that story in the comments below. We read all of them. Let us know, and we'll see you in the next video.